Shalom, welcome to Jerusalem. We are very honored and happy to be with you. Unfortunately, I know that you could not be on the ground this time, and I really hope that you will have the opportunity in the future to come and visit Israel and come and visit Jerusalem. Meanwhile, I would like to offer you to join us to an interesting tour of the city of Jerusalem. My name is Avi Melamed. I was born and raised in the city of Jerusalem. My parents were born and raised in the city of Jerusalem. My grandparents, my great-grandparents lived in the old city of Jerusalem that you could see right behind me in the 1800s. My kids were born actually in Jerusalem. So you could see that Jerusalem is very much part of me, and I am part of Jerusalem. Jerusalem has so many faces, but before we talk about it, through the different people, the amazing people that we are going to meet during the tour, let me tell you some things about Jerusalem. Jerusalem is the capital of the state of Israel. It is located right at the center of the state of Israel. In fact, Jerusalem is located on top of a mountain spine that is quite high. It's about almost 3,000 feet in elevation. In fact, I'm going to share with you an interesting secret about Jerusalem. It snows in Jerusalem in wintertime. So for me, growing up in Jerusalem, like many other kids growing up in Jerusalem, snow was a wonderful experience, as you could understand. Indeed, Jerusalem is breathtaking during snow time or any time. As I said, Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. Almost 1 million people live in Jerusalem. About 550,000 people in Jerusalem are Jews, like myself. About 350,000 people in Jerusalem are Muslims, also known as Jerusalemite Arabs or Jerusalemite Palestinians. There is also a community of Christians, some 10,000 Christians, who live in the old city of Jerusalem. A major symbol of Jerusalem is the old city of Jerusalem. I'm sure that you probably heard of the old city of Jerusalem, where, interesting enough, the old city of Jerusalem is only just a small part of the city of Jerusalem. The city of Jerusalem is quite big in terms of area. However, as we are talking about the old city of Jerusalem, here is an interesting fact about this place. It's a little square. Think about it like a square. This is a square of some less than 1 square mile. There are 4 quarters in the old city of Jerusalem: a Jewish quarter, a Muslim quarter, Christian quarter, and Armenian quarter. That has been the shape, the structure of the old city of Jerusalem for centuries. In the old city of Jerusalem, there are major symbols and sites that are holy for Judaism, for Islam, for Christianity. For example, you could see beyond me one of the major symbols of the Muslim world, which is the Dome of the Rock, located inside a compound known as the Temple Mount compound, or in Arabic, Al-Haram al-Sharif, or in Hebrew, Har-Bayit. That compound is interesting for itself. It's a small cube within the cube of the old city of Jerusalem. Another major site in the old city of Jerusalem is the Western Wall, the Wailing Wall, which is a very holy site for Jews through the centuries. Another major site in the old city is the Holy Sepulchre Church, one of the most sacred sites for Christians all around the world. But Jerusalem is not only the old city of Jerusalem. There are other parts of the city of Jerusalem. In fact, it's a very large city in terms of its land. There are many different neighborhoods in Jerusalem, spread all across the city, in the north, in the south, in the east, in the west part of the city. Some of the neighborhoods are more old. Some of the neighborhoods are relatively new. Some of the neighborhoods are mixed in the sense there are different communities who live one next to the other, Arabs and Jews, secular and religious, and so on and so on. Basically, what I'm sharing with you is a very interesting aspect of Jerusalem. Jerusalem is a city that has an amazing human fabric. Different people, different beliefs, different traditions that are joining together to create the wonderful thing that is called Jerusalem. You know, I want to share with you a personal story out of many personal stories that I have in Jerusalem. You know, I was born and grew up in the city of Jerusalem, as I told you before. My mother language is Hebrew. But just the same, Arabic was also all the time in the background, because many people in Jerusalem, their mother language is Arabic. Also, my grandfather, my mother's father, Mordecai, came from Iraq, an Arab state. He was Jew, but he was also fluent in Arabic. So when I grew up in Jerusalem, I heard all the languages around me: English, Hebrew, Arabic, and many other languages. I grew up in Jerusalem in the 60s. We used to play out there on the streets. Back then, we didn't used to have video games or laptops. And the games we used to play out on the street sometimes had very odd, mysterious names. We did not understand the meaning of the names. Some of the names sound like foreign, not in Hebrew. They sound like in English or in Arabic. And in fact, when I grew up, I realized that many of the games we played indeed have different names in Hebrew, which is my mother tongue, or in Arabic, or in English. That is also manifestation of the uniqueness of Jerusalem, of the fabric of Jerusalem. It is my pleasure and honor to be your host for the next two sessions, during which we will take tour in Jerusalem. We will meet wonderful, amazing people. We will see Jerusalem from different perspectives. We could even taste and feel the food of Jerusalem. So let me introduce to you our first guest, an outstanding person that is going to provide you with unique perspective of the story of Jerusalem. My dear friend, Jared Goldfarb, who is located right now south of the old city of Jerusalem. Jared, the floor is yours.
Hello everyone, and welcome to Jerusalem. My name is Jared, and you can probably hear from my accent that I was not born in the Middle East, but rather I grew up in New Hampshire in the United States. I grew up in a Jewish family. I went to university in Boston, and about 25 years ago, I decided to come and visit this land for the first time, to the city of Jerusalem. And little did I know the magic that I would find here in this place that would essentially keep me here. And today, I call Jerusalem home, and I would like to share a little bit with you about the background and the history of this very, very special place, which is not only home to nearly 1 million people, but also attracts people of faith, tourists, scientists, travelers from all over the world to explore the ancient history, the many narratives and stories, and of course the very beautiful and very sacred monuments that make Jerusalem a fairly well-known city. So you are looking literally at my backyard. I live just down the street from this very special place here in southern Jerusalem. We are standing just outside of the ancient city, which you might be able to make out in the distance, especially if you're able to see the shiny golden dome, which we'll be talking about in a little bit. That ancient city takes us back, archaeologically speaking, to well over 3,000 years ago. And so when we look at the science of what comes out of the earth, when we dig through all of the historical layers, we're able to tell that long before our stories even begin, there were many different peoples who lived on this land, most of whose stories we are not familiar with. For better or for worse, it's not really the science or the archaeology that makes people fall in love with the city of Jerusalem or come here perhaps to live, but rather the narratives that are layered on top of those archaeological foundations. And that's what I would like to share with you a little bit about before we meet some of the residents of Jerusalem who will share a little bit more of a personal connection to those various layers and stories. So as we look in the distance, again, using the Golden Dome as a marking point, we might be able to sense that there are a number of different hills that make up Jerusalem. The taller hills actually are just around the ancient city with the Golden Dome. The Golden Dome itself sits on a slightly lower hill. And it's on that hill that perhaps the first of our stories takes place. Now, I have to say something very important here, and that is that while many of us are compelled by facts and history and science, one of the mysteries of Jerusalem is that the stories that are most powerful and most attractive to the people that live here and the people that come and visit are not necessarily rooted in history or in fact. They are in fact part of our belief systems, what we might refer to as a faith narrative. And so when I mention the first story, there's a very good chance that historically it comes first in line in terms of all of the different narratives that we will meet. But we don't really know exactly when it takes place, and certainly many archaeologists and scientists could even call into question whether it takes place. But when we speak sometimes about our feelings and our connections and our beliefs to a place, especially like Jerusalem, maybe we're not quite as concerned about the facts, but what those stories can teach us, how they can make us feel connected to this particular place. So again, before you meet my three good friends who will share the various community connections to Jerusalem, I want to layer some of those stories for you so you have some context as to the history of Jerusalem. So on that hill where we see the Golden Dome, the first story that I'll share with you is that of the Hebrew Bible. We learn in the book of Genesis that there is a man named Abraham who comes from a land fairly far away. Today we would call it Iraq in the Middle East. And he is on a journey with his family, and along the path he encounters, let's say, God, because that's what the text says. And that relationship, as it develops, brings Abraham into this land, which is then called Canaan. And that layer of history brings Abraham into a relationship with one God, a form of belief system that we will eventually call monotheism, right? One God as opposed to believing in many gods. And as the story plays out in the book of Genesis, in the Jewish tradition, we are told that Abraham is given a test to prove his faith in God. And in doing so, he is called upon to sacrifice his beloved son Isaac. And in proving that test, he goes on a journey to a land which many Jews around the world believe is the land that you are looking at right now. And according to that tradition, Abraham is ready to give his son to God through sacrifice on top of that hill where you see the Golden Dome. As a result of Abraham passing the test, first of all, he does not sacrifice his son, and that cements the relationship with God, which throughout the generations of the children of Abraham, which all of our faith traditions feel connected to, but specifically within the Jewish tradition, it is going to evolve not just into a family, not just into a people, but literally a kingdom upon this very land. And as that kingdom becomes situated, as people develop the land, the resources to sustain their communities for generations, they are going to remember that the core of their identity is that relationship with God. And in order to sanctify that relationship, once again, on that hill where you see the Golden Dome, the temple will be built. The temple which is seen as both a house of God, a dwelling place of the Almighty, but also a very functional place so that the rituals, the holidays, and many of the other traditions of the Israelites, of the Jewish people, can be observed. And so that becomes essentially the first layer of Jerusalem. Again, I'll remind you that we're talking about the stories here, not the archaeological layers. And so that layer of ancient Israelite, ancient Jewish tradition becomes very, very well cemented in history. And we read throughout the biblical text and many of the complementary historical texts that that nation will rise and fall, and rise again and fall, just as we see with many peoples all around the world. But every time that the Jews rise and fall, they're always going to come back to the focal point, and that is the city of Jerusalem. Even in a time when they might be at the lowest of lows, and they were defeated in war and kicked out of their lands, and were seeking happier places elsewhere, even without a physical Jerusalem, there is a connection, perhaps historical, perhaps memory, perhaps spiritual, that will bring them back, maybe not physically, but certainly in a relationship with this place called Jerusalem. As time moves on, we move into a period roughly 2,000 years ago, when the Roman Empire is perhaps at its most dominant, and they control this particular land, and we now find ourselves in a city, Jerusalem, that is part of a district called Judea. And Judea, while still home to the sacred temple of the Jews, also becomes a focal point for a different reason. And that is that as far away as Jewish communities might go to settle and find new opportunities and to give birth to new generations of their families, they are called back to the sacred city in order to reconnect with their history, with their traditions, and perhaps with God, through a form of observance that we might call pilgrimage, a physical journey to connect to this space. And one of those Jews who feels compelled to keep alive that connection with his Jewish ancestors and his Jewish traditions that we read about in the biblical texts is a young man named Jesus. While Jesus doesn't call Jerusalem home, like many of the Jewish world at that time, 2,000 years ago, he does feel very connected to the city because of that first layer of narrative, of story that I just shared with you. And so as part of that pilgrimage process, he too is going to find himself coming to Jerusalem to both participate in the communal rituals, but also at that particular time to teach about the way he understands his traditions. And in doing so, he is going to find himself in, shall we say, conflict with many of the other sectors of his Jewish world 2,000 years ago. And so, as many of you probably know, it's in the city of Jerusalem that Jesus eventually is going to meet his fate on the cross, being punished, persecuted perhaps, for the way that he understands his faith tradition. This is nothing terribly new in layering of various religious narratives, but very important one for the city of Jerusalem. And so, while it's very hard to distinguish from this particular vantage point, but luckily we'll be able to see it up close in a brief moment, just next to the shiny golden dome, there are actually a number of other domes that top the various religious monuments that make up this fantastic place called ancient Jerusalem. One of those is essentially a monument to the narrative of the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus. And we're going to hear a little bit about that particular story and the connection to the Christian community that lives in Jerusalem today by my friend John in a few moments. So we have now layered two narratives onto the city, right? This ancient layer of the Hebrew Bible, the early Israelite period, the beginning of perhaps the Jewish faith, and then we layer on top of that Jesus as a Jew who will be seen as a Messiah, a Son of God, a prophet, and followed as a teacher, as a leader, which gives birth to the world of Christianity. And that becomes the second layer of Jerusalem. It's upon those two layers that we meet perhaps our third prophet, our third character in the various stories of Jerusalem. And that is, of course, Muhammad. Although, once again, Muhammad is not born and raised in the city of Jerusalem, but rather in the Arabian Peninsula to the southeast of this land, Muhammad as well is going to be taught the traditions and the ways of monotheism, the belief in one God, and he is going to be called upon to teach his generations and his communities in the same way that Abraham and Jesus did. The particular narrative of Muhammad, which becomes known as the faith or the religion of Islam, is going to bring Muhammad from the Arabian Peninsula to, once again, this very city. Why? Because in the Islamic tradition, the belief is that because of the layering of the earlier stories, this hill that we are looking at right now is well acknowledged, perhaps, as the house of God. Whether or not there's a physical structure, it still is very powerful, very resonant of the stories that people are telling. And so Muhammad is brought, according to the Islamic tradition, to that same very hill where Abraham may have offered up his son as a test to show his faith in God, and where Jesus came to perform the rituals of the temple and to teach about his understanding of his relationship with God. And so Muhammad too is going to stand on top of that hill, and according to the Islamic tradition, meet all of the preceding prophets as he meets with God to discuss one of the core precepts of the Islamic faith, and that is Muslim prayer to God. As a result of that particular story, another monument is built, right? Layering another layer on top of these many different stories in Jerusalem, and that is actually the Golden Dome that you see right behind me. That Golden Dome commemorates this journey, the night journey of Muhammad to come to Jerusalem to meet with God, after which, of course, he is instructed to go back to his community where he will teach and pass on those traditions. So now that we have at least a beginning of an understanding of the three layers of Jerusalem, we can probably take a guess at two things that are going to evolve in the many hundreds of years that have passed since these stories may have taken place. One, of course, is there are going to be some challenges that are faced by each community in understanding the role of their story, of their prophet, in what is now a relatively crowded story space. It's not just one story of Jerusalem, but there are many stories of Jerusalem. And each community is going to tell their story of Jerusalem in a slightly different way. And so as each community interacts with each other, and maybe as they come and go from Jerusalem, or even settle here and call it home, we are going to see throughout the centuries many challenges that perhaps even evolve into conflict. Again, nothing new in the world, but something very, very real for the history of Jerusalem. However, there's another side to it, and that is that at least on the best of days, there is something quite magical to understand that one small city, one small hill even, could possibly be home to so many of the stories that inform the way that a very large portion of humanity around the world thinks, lives their lives, tries to teach their children. And that's pretty fascinating. That is pretty amazing. So we can talk about and hold together the juxtaposition of these two elements of our faith traditions in Jerusalem. On one hand, the inevitable conflict of sharing a space but telling your story of that space differently. But on the other hand, we can also very much appreciate and hopefully treasure the potential of one hill that has offered so much to the world in terms of education and inspiration and hope. And so with that, with those foundational layers of understanding at least where the beginnings of our Jerusalem stories come from, I now want to leave it to my three friends, Esti, John, and Adam, to share a little bit more personally about their traditions as members of the different faith communities: the Jewish community, the Christian community, and the Muslim community.
Hi, I'm Esti Hershkowitz and I'm a tour guide in Israel. I was born and bred in New York, but I came to live in Israel right after college. I met my husband here on the first day that I was here. He's also a native New Yorker. And together we live in Jerusalem, right outside Jerusalem. We have 5 children, and now we have 6 beautiful, smart, talented grandchildren as well. I grew up in a religious Jewish household. And whenever we celebrated any holidays, Jerusalem was always mentioned. It still is. There was art on our house walls, all related to Jerusalem. We still have that art. Anytime a baby was born, anytime somebody got married, anytime we celebrated any holidays, anything life cycle, Jerusalem was always there in the background. But you know how, like, when something's in the background, hovering around in the background, you don't always notice it, sort of like a magnet on your refrigerator. You don't always notice it. But with Jerusalem, it was always in the background, and we always did notice it. It always did matter. It was important. Why is that? It's sort of indescribable. It's very hard to explain. I know it to be true, but in order to help you understand it, I'm going to give a little bit of a demo. Look behind me. That is the Western Wall, what we call the Kotel. That's a really big deal. The press, the media. It's a little bit early in the day today, so it's not so busy, but this Western Wall is the world's largest synagogue. It's open 24/7. It's usually hustling and bustling, and it will be later on. Take a look at what the Western Wall really is. It is built on something called Mount Moriah. Can you see Mount Moriah? Okay. King Solomon built the first temple almost at the top of Mount Moriah. There was a little outcropping, and he built the temple at the top of Mount Moriah. That temple stood for 410 years. The Assyrians came, and then the Babylonians came, and they destroyed the temple. So it's gone. 70 years later, the Jews were able to come back from their exile, and they rebuilt the temple. But this time, even though it's on the exact same spot, it's way, way, way smaller. Eventually, Herod, who is a king over the Jews appointed by the Romans, comes along and wants to build the temple to be bigger because he's not a popular king and he wants to become popular. And getting the bigger temple, a fancier temple, is right the best way to get to the Jews' hearts. So what does he do? He goes to the same exact spot. He cuts off the back of the temple mount, uses those stones and rolls them downhill, builds a platform that is 20 times the size that it had been before, and it also flattens out the mountain, And in the exact same spot where the temple has been, except now it's way, way, way bigger, stands the second temple. And that second temple also stands for 420 years. That temple was the house of God. Now the temple isn't there anymore. The platform is there, so the Temple Mount that you're seeing behind us doesn't look like a mountain, but you can see where the temple used to stand. Okay? That house of God is not standing there anymore, but the Jews believe, and really all people believe, that God's presence, God's feeling is still there. Okay. We're standing in front of the Western Wall, what we call the Kotel. It is in front of the Temple Mount because that's where our temples were built, and I'm going to show you a demo about that in just a minute. But I want to also explain that the Temple Mount has many different names because it is open to all peoples. So it can be, for the Muslims, Haram al-Sharif. It can be the Temple Mount for the Christians. And for us, it is called Har Habayit, the place where the temple was built. To help you understand the connection between what you're seeing and that fancy temple that you're imagining, I have this over here. Can you see that this is the Kotel, the Western Wall? The Western Wall of what? Well, remember that platform that Herod built and built the temple on top of it? That platform, which enlarged the Temple Mount immeasurably, that platform has 4 walls to it. An eastern wall, a southern wall, a northern wall, and a western wall. The western wall that we are at now is the western wall of the platform upon which the temple stood. This helps us understand that. Okay, I'm going to do it again so that you can see it better. This is what the wall looks like today. This is what it looks like. What that means is that now you understand the architecture of it, but what I want to try to explain to you now is how it goes beyond that. It goes so much beyond that. The people who come here to pray, or to meditate, or to read the holy books, or to look at other people who are praying and looking at holy books, everybody feels that feeling. This is where God's Spirit is. Whether you see it, whether you feel it, whether you're Jewish, whether you're a visitor, whether you live here, whether you're any other religion or any other nationality, the Spirit of God, the connectedness is very tangible here. Everybody who comes here feels that different energy. Obviously, God is everywhere. God is in the heavens, but we talk to him because he's here on earth, anywhere we need him to be. But, so to speak, this is his favorite place on earth. This is where he is most strongly felt. But that's a spiritual kind of thing, and it's really hard to explain. It's non-verbalizable. And so I'm going to try to explain it a little bit better by telling you a joke. Now, I'm warning you, it's not a terribly good joke. So you have been prepared. In 1948, we declare our independence, and a man named David Ben-Gurion is our first prime minister. David Ben-Gurion is obviously looking to get international standing and connections. So when Khrushchev invites him to the Kremlin in Russia, he goes, and Khrushchev brings him into the office in the Kremlin, and it's this enormous room. And in the enormous room, he has this enormous desk. And on the desk, there are 3 telephones. And Khrushchev looks at David Ben-Gurion and says, "You see? We have black telephone, everybody anywhere in the world. Red telephone, anywhere in Russia. White telephone, We can even call God in heaven. We don't believe in God, but we in Russia can call God. And David Ben-Gurion is noticeably impressed. Very nice. And he returns to Israel, and of course, he has to reciprocate. So he invites Khrushchev back the next year. Israel is not quite as big as Russia on any scale. So he invites Khrushchev into his tiny little office. It's really cramped and crowded. And somewhere in the corner of this tiny room, there's this banged up desk. And on the desk, there's 2 phones. And Khrushchev points to the phones and he goes, "What is that, only 2? And David Ben-Gurion says, well, yeah, the blue one is for anywhere in the world and anywhere in Israel. The white one is anywhere in Israel. What about God? Khrushchev says, oh, David Ben-Gurion says, that's just a local phone call. I warned you that it was a bad joke, but it does help you understand this sense of being close to God, of being connected to God, of being really in the aura, in the spirit that is pervasive throughout Jerusalem to anyone who comes to visit here. And because I'm able to be here every day, I feel really blessed because it enriches my routine, mundane, day-to-day, as well as my rituals, my celebrations, my prayers. I'm really very lucky.
So my name is John Manayer. I'll be sharing with you a bit about my personal story and my relationship and connection to the city of Jerusalem. I am a Palestinian Christian, so for some of you that might be a new term. There are indeed Palestinians and Arabs who are Christians. In Jerusalem we're about 10,000 local Christians, so a very small minority. In terms of the whole population in the land, we're less than 2%. So again, we're a very, very small minority. My father is Palestinian Christian, but my mother's English. So the two met here in the land when my mother came to volunteer amongst the local Christians, met my father, fell in love, and got married. They moved together from Jaffa to Jerusalem. But my father, who's a local Palestinian Christian, he comes from the city of Lydda, or also known as Lod. And in this city, there's a very old Christian community. In fact, the old church that was built there in the late 19th century was built by my family. It's called the St. George Church, where, according to the legend, St. George himself, his head at least, was buried in the church. But when they got married, they moved together to Jerusalem. And this was for practical reasons. My father was working in both Jerusalem and Bethlehem. And for many of you, you're probably familiar with the city Bethlehem. Of course, it has to do a lot with the Christmas story where Jesus Christ, according to the Christian tradition, was born in that city. So as someone who grew up in Jerusalem, I would also often go to Bethlehem. The Church of the Nativity is the most important church for Christians in Bethlehem, where we believe Christ was born. And there's until today a fairly large population of Palestinian Christians in the city of Bethlehem who continue the tradition of maintaining the church and presence in the land. Another important site in Bethlehem, or slightly outside of Bethlehem, is the Shepherd's Field in Beit Sahur. And this is where, according to tradition, we believe that the angel appeared to the shepherds and told them about the birth of Jesus Christ. And then, of course, according to the Gospels, the shepherds then go to the manger where Mary, Joseph, and eventually Jesus are. Behind me is the most perhaps holy place for local Christians. It's the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, also known as the Church of Resurrection. But behind me, right behind me, here is the Church of the Redeemer, which is a Lutheran church. It's a Protestant church. that was built in the also late 19th century.
It's so quiet. It's amazing. I don't think I've ever seen it.
Behind me, you can see the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, also known as the Church of Resurrection. Some of us local Christians prefer to call the Church of Resurrection because it emphasizes the resurrection of Christ. So according to tradition, this is where Jesus Christ was crucified, buried, and raised from the dead. And this is an extremely important site for us Christians. This is what connects us to our faith, to our religion. And we spend, the Christians that live in Jerusalem, a lot of time in this area, specifically during the Easter period. Easter for Arab Eastern Christians is more important or a bigger holiday than Christmas itself. Again, this might sound a bit strange for some Christians coming from the West or from the US, but Easter is the main holiday for us here in the land, and this is because of its theological significance and of course the church that is related to Easter itself. Not only is it important to us local Christians, but Christians all around the world come to visit this church. They save a lot of money and come from so many different countries, whether it be in Asia, North America, South America, Europe, Africa, you name it, they come here. And as such, we have this special interaction with the different international Christians. We're constantly in dialogue with them. We often tend to work with them because many local Christians, Palestinian Christians, tend to work in tourism. And many Christians abroad also want to work with local Christians, and therefore there's sort of this interesting relationship that the local and Christians living abroad. One particular really interesting, fascinating, amazing, beautiful tradition in this church is the Holy Fire ceremony. So there are many different denominations in this specific church, but during Easter, during the Eastern Easter, the Orthodox Easter, which has a different date than the Western calendar, the patriarch of the Greek Orthodox Church, which is one of the biggest denominations in this church, but also in the land, he enters the tomb and he has with him lots of candles. And he emerges after a short while from the tomb with the candles lit, and the candles have fire. And according to many Christians, this is a miracle that happens every single Easter, which symbolizes the resurrection and the light and the fire that comes into darkness. In the same way that when Jesus was crucified and buried, there was darkness, and then in his resurrection there was light. This is a symbolic message of that. So entering the tomb with candles that are not lit and emerging out of it with fire. And this fire spreads around the world. Local Christians spread it locally in the different towns, cities, different communities, different Christians, but also a lot of the pilgrims come and take the fire. And even there's diplomatic arrangement to take the fire to different places around the world. And there's literally private jets waiting for this holy fire to take it to different various countries, specifically countries that are Christian Orthodox. But for me, when people ask me about Jerusalem and ask what is important to me as someone who lives here, they immediately think I'm going to talk about the church or the stones or the different areas where Jesus and the prophets walked and talked. But actually for me, what makes Jerusalem special is the relationships I built with the different communities here. The Christian community is a very small community. In terms of Palestinian Christians in Jerusalem, we're around 10,000 people. In the whole land, we're less than 2%. So naturally, I grew up with people who don't believe in the same faith as me, who belong to a different religion. And I got to know them and build friendship with them. And this is what really makes Jerusalem special to me, is that it's not weird for me or abnormal to have friends, even family, who come from different religious traditions. Because of this unique sort of upbringing, I myself grew up in an Israeli Jewish school, so a lot of my school friends are Israeli Jews, but also a lot of Muslim friends from the neighborhood and family friends. I myself are involved in a project that is specifically catered to university students here in Jerusalem. So we have interfaith groups meeting and discussing through the sacred scriptures, through the Quran, the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament, different subjects. So we use our own tradition, our own scripture to talk about contemporary subjects. And through that, build and get to know each other better. So I often try and challenge both myself, my community, and the people who come to visit. What is the type of Jerusalem that you have in your imagination? Is it one of equality? Is it one of justice? Is it one of dialogue? And this is a challenge indeed for every city. We all have an imagination of our city, what we want our city to be like. And again, a holy city is not just Jerusalem. It can be any city because of the people, the relationships that you form. As such, this is a challenge for all people living in all different places around the world. What type of city do you want to envision?
Hello my people, hello my friends, welcome to Jerusalem. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Adam, I am 37 years old. I was born in Jerusalem, Al-Quds. I grew up in Amman, Jordan. I moved back to Jerusalem 12 years ago. I am a Muslim and this is my religion. I am an Arab and this is my mother tongue language and my identity. I am an Israeli and Jordanian. These are my two nationalities and I am a Palestinian. Welcome to Jerusalem, and this is such a real beautiful view of Jerusalem, and allow me to introduce you to this beautiful view. At the left we see the Mount of Olives, such a biblical important mountain mentioned. We see at least 3 churches on the top of the mountain and a mosque, and behind the mountain we also see the biggest and the oldest Jewish cemetery on the mountain itself, and this is to our east. I want you to look in the back and all of these high towers. This is the west side of the city. It is just behind the old city that you see, and just on my right and behind me we are seeing the Hebrew University. And where is Jerusalem? Jerusalem is the real old city. I see the walls of Jerusalem. All of you see the walls of Jerusalem, and here in the middle you see the Dome of the Rock. Jerusalem is 4,000 years old city and more, and my tribe migrated to Jerusalem 900 years ago. My father and my mother, they lived and they grew up in the old city, and all of these beautiful neighborhoods that are hugging the city from the eastern side, this is what we call East Jerusalem. I live actually just down there in a village called Wadi Al-Joz, and this is all of this area of the city we call East Jerusalem. And in the middle of the view, you all wonder, and in every picture you saw before you come to Jerusalem, you saw a shining golden dome. What is this dome? Welcome to the Dome of the Rock. The Dome of the Rock is an octagon. The early Muslims came in the year 700 CE. They built one of the most magnificent buildings ever. Why did they build it? to memorize and to represent such a magnificent miracle. It is a spiritual and a physical miracle that took a place with the Prophet Muhammad at the location of Jerusalem, where he met with all of the previous prophets. And such at a location, this is where a command came from Allah for the Muslims to pray 5 times a day, which is a thing that is happening every day till today. And actually a prayer just took a place an hour ago at the whole compound that you see. The whole compound that you see is surrounded by walls, and these are the walls of Jerusalem. Guess what? They were built 500 years ago. It just recently, in the eyes of the people of Jerusalem, this is brand new. And what's all behind it? This is what we call Al-Haram Al-Sharif, the holiest compound, and it contains 2 well-known structures, as how you see. One structure is called Al-Aqsa Mosque. It has a gray dome. I assume most of you can notice it. And this is functioning today as a mosque for the men. And the Dome of the Rock is functioning today as a mosque for women. All of the whole compound was a prayer direction for almost 13 years. And it became the most important pilgrim site and mosque for all of the Muslims all over the world. Friends, and just today, the Ramadan is over. Last day was yesterday. The fast is over after 30 days of fasting, a lot of worshipings, a lot of praise, and all of these actually took a place at this compound that you see. Today, all of the Muslims in the world, including myself, we are celebrating the first holiday, the first religious holiday that we have as a Muslims, called Eid al-Fitr. Local Muslims and all of the Muslims in the world are celebrating the religious holiday, Eid al-Fitr. It is taking a place at the compound that we see behind me. All of the Muslims today are actually gathering right now to a special prayer called Eid al-Fitr prayer. It contains a prayer and it contains a speech, such a speech that encourages the people to give charity, which is a certain amount called Zakat al-Fitr, and they also encourage them to be and to celebrate modesty and not to go extreme after a long month of worshipping has been over. And I actually drove my father just 20 minutes ago to Al-Haram Al-Sharif, and after the prayer is over, and actually it might be going just right now, each family of the local families of Jerusalem gather under a certain tree inside the compound. They know the tree. It's not written under their name or by their name, but each family know where to find the other members and exactly at which tree. All of them will gather and they will walk all together and they will visit to the Muslim cemetery, which is outside of the walls of Jerusalem. It is so big. It starts from the beginning of the wall, it ends at the end of the wall. I have 2 grandfathers are buried there. My grandmother is buried there, and I have friends are buried there as well. After the prayer and after the visiting to the cemetery, all of the families will go back to their families. We will give the children a pocket money. This is what my dad usually to do to us. We all will gather to a supper, and this is how we will continue to celebrate. So I wish every one of you a happy holiday, and from here I send you a letter from Jerusalem. I in Jerusalem, we tell you, may God bless you, may God bless your families, and may God bless your country.